And the reason I do this and put these thoughts into your head, you know what alchemists do, they change lead into gold. And it's just adding little nuggets into your own mind, your own brain, about thinking about history, thinking about what is true and what isn't true anymore. There are 4 people that people think betting, if you like, on horses. Edward de Vere, the 17th Earl of Oxford. Over here, Sir Francis Bacon. Here, Sir Philip Sidney and Christopher Marlowe. There are 4 people that are in the running for who the real Shakespeare, the writer, was. Now, if you're going to bet on this man, Edward de Vere, the 17th Earl of Oxford. The Earl of Oxford goes back to the time of the Battle of Hastings and William the Conqueror. It was one of the oldest aristocratic titles that there was in the UK. And I had a little bit of fun with AI. AI is fun to play with, but I don't think robots will take over the world quite, and I'll show you why in a minute. But I had Edward de Vere here playing cards with William Shakespeare, Ben Jonson, and in the background there a guy called Dr. John Dee. They're all players in this play. They all say, write about what you know about. And Hamlet, which was one of the last plays by William Shakespeare, tells the story of Edward de Vere. His father was died young. His mother married quickly again. There was a stabbing of a ambassador, if you like, to the king. The advice the ambassador came in Hamlet, the advice he gave is absolutely paralleled by the advice of William Cecil to his son Robert. I'll explain all that in a minute. Captured by pirates, Edward de Vere was captured by pirates, and his belongings were captured again by pirates. A sword duel, he was in a sword duel. He was stabbed in the leg and therefore became a bit invalided. And the Shakespeare troupe, visited Elsinore, which was the Danish castle in the story of Hamlet. Now again, I love AI, but again, when you try and get real tennis, royal tennis, which is what the Elizabethans played, it's indoors like a squash court. I couldn't get AI to understand what real tennis was. It thinks this is real tennis. And again, look at this, just bundles of fruit on the court. I didn't ask for bundles of fruit on the court, on a tennis court, but there you go. So I don't think quite that they'll take over the world. Edward de Vere had a major fight with Sir Philip Sidney, the other contender for the throne of Shakespeare. It's well written in the history books that happened. And again, in Hamlet, a fight in a tennis match was mentioned. Also, Romeo and Juliet, if you like, the Capulets and the Montagues, there was a sword fight. In the case of Edward de Vere, he made pregnant a maid of honor of Elizabeth I, called Anne Vavasour, and the relatives of Anne Vavasour were quite upset and angry by all of this, so there was a street fight. So Hamlet reflects the life of Edward de Vere. The other things, again, if you look at the sonnets, far fly thy fame, most of me, beloved, whose silent name one letter bounds. Well, O. He signed O for Oxford. And as a decrepit father takes delight to see his active child do deeds of youth, so I made lame by fortune's dearest spite. He was lame by virtue of a sword piercing. Even the Globe Theatre, this is the rebuilt one in London, it was known as the Big O. Could that in any way have been a link? O for Oxford, O for the Globe Theatre. Now I know what you're going to ask. You're going to ask me straight away, sorry, I go back one. Why would he keep quiet? Why would he not? This is a genius when you read Shakespeare. Why would he not lay claim to this? Well, these are the reasons aristocrats didn't write for the hoi polloi for us. They sent poetry between each other. We were really out of bounds. Plays could be contentious and they could lead to torture or execution. I'll explain that in a minute. But there could be good propaganda. I mean, in the case of Richard II, regicide happens. Now, who's going to write about that at the time of Elizabeth I, who has enemies all over, and suddenly a play is being shown to the general public about, yeah, you can kill a king, no problem. He was a member of the Invisibles. He tried to move things in the country in a different way, but quietly. And he may indeed have been Elizabeth's illegitimate son. There's quite a lot of writing on that. I couldn't point to that definitely and say that that was true. But in Elizabeth the first time, there were over 300 executions. So you had to be very, very careful what you said and what you did. She even executed her cousin, Mary, Queen of Scots. So if aristocracy and royalty wasn't safe, nobody else was. Let's have a look at Shakespeare the actor. He left his second best bed to his wife. He was a snob. He wanted a heraldic shield. He, in fact, paid for one. He didn't have one by right. He was convicted in his youth of poaching deer, possibly had illegitimate daughters. Can you imagine this? Shakespeare, the writer, had illegitimate daughters. That's not going to be the case, is it? Left only 6 signatures to posterity. There are 6 signatures throughout history. They're in the Hall of Records in Whitehall. No knowledge of an education beyond primary level. He could have gone to grammar school, but there's no proof that he did. Certainly in the fact that he was an actor showed he could read and write. That's pretty good, but beyond that, no. Left no books in his will. Can you imagine this of William Shakespeare? No books in his will. No knowledge of him travelling outside the United Kingdom. And he appeared to be, in the records, a money-grabbing man. It was all about land and ownership. So there's his heraldic shield. And interestingly, it's a heraldic jousting stick. Can you see that? And up on the top as well with the eagle holding it. And the motto is not without right. Now, people change that to no without right. He didn't have a right to this title. And in one of Ben Jonson's plays, there's clearly a character that is William Shakespeare, the actor, getting a heraldic shield. And the others say, we can take that with a pinch of mustard, similar to a pinch of salt, that he didn't really deserve it. The real Shakespeare, he was known to Ben Jonson, Henry Russley, Dr. John Dee, and the Herbert brothers, simply because he wrote or dedicated works to them. Extensive travel and education. He was an aristocrat of the first water. Access to court circles because of that. Languages. He wrote French. He wrote and read French, Latin, Greek, even Hebrew. And the Geneva Bible, the first Bible in English, written in Switzerland, something like 50 years, I think, before the first Bible. James the King did not like the Geneva Bible because it didn't quite say nice things about kings and monarchy. So he banned it and had his own version of the Bible printed in English. Anyway, Edward had a copy of the Geneva Bible. There were only about a dozen in England at the time. He had one. And a lot of his Shakespearean writing uses that background, that Bible. Knowledge of theatre mechanics, I'll come to that in a second. A contemporary lifespan of Shakespeare, yes, he lived in Shakespeare's time. That would be obviously evidential. Some explanation of his posthumous works because he died in 1604. So yes, you can ask me, hang on, what about these works that were, coming out to 1623 when his first folio came out? A link to this pseudonym of Shakespeare, how come he used that? And an extensive library of books. Well, if he didn't have them, but he did, John Dee, his partner, had the biggest library in the UK. There's his heraldic shield, the blue ball, which I'll come to again later in the talk, the white star, which again I'll come to later. These are clues that are coming up in what I'm about to tell you. So again, to answer that question of, how come books came out after his death? Well, think of J.R.R. Tolkien, The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings trilogy. There's 20, 30 books beyond that. There's Netflix films. If there's a name that's worth money, you're going to use it. And the same with James Bond, Ian Fleming. He wrote 14 books. Do you know how many films there are? 30 so far, and about 30 books, James Bond. Nothing to do with Ian Fleming. So it could possibly have happened that, yes, he died, but there was a machine going on that kept him going. And I called it the manufactory, and I was saying that Edward de Vere ran it, he managed it, He followed after his death by John Dee, Dr. John Dee, to the death of Dee in 1611, and that would have been enough to cover all the books of Shakespeare beyond his death. I talked about the travelling. Look at the books in Italy alone, the historical books and then the romance books and the comedies. Loads and loads of books. And this guy here, Richard Paul Rowe, followed in the footsteps of Shakespeare in Italy, and he found out incredible things like where Portia's palace was in Merchant of Venice and how she journeyed between Venice and her own palace to disguise herself as a lawyer, a male lawyer, and then get back to be Portia in her palace. He also talked about Athens. There's a play in Athens, but it wasn't Athens in Greece, it was Athens, a suburb of a city in Italy. So if I tell you that Edward de Vere spent 2 whole years in Italy, hopefully that's another bit of evidence. What about the name Shakespeare? Well, de Vere was also Viscount Bulbeck. And there you go, you've got not quite a shaker of spears, but even a breaker of spears. He was a great jouster. He was a shaker of spears. He did break spears. He won tournaments, Edward de Vere. And again with AI, I love the fact they've nearly got this right, except that the crowd behind look like they're watching Wimbledon, don't they? It's quite amazing, quite amazing. There were 3 very important guys behind Elizabeth I. One was Lord Burleigh, William Cecil. He was truly the power behind the throne. And then Francis Walsingham, the spy master, the guy who had spies on the continent and throughout the UK to keep the Queen safe. The third guy was Dr. John Dee. Now, you notice he's in black, and he's black with a black cap. I'm going to explain later. You might have seen the program Upstart Crow about Shakespeare. Where did that come from? He looks crow-like in his black gown and cap. And I know you're probably going to smile at this, but he worked for Walsingham as a spy, and he was number 007. The eyes and the ears of Queen Elizabeth. And if you think, no, that can't be true, Ian Fleming got the idea of 007 from reading the history of John Dee. So that's where James Bond got his moniker. Here he is showing Elizabeth the secret of gunpowder. He actually predicted what day she should get her coronation, and it was a very favourable day as it happened, so he was very much in the good cards of Elizabeth. Dr. John Dee, he was a polymath. He was a Leonardo da Vinci or an Isaac Newton of the day. He was into everything. And he taught Edward de Vere as a young boy. He taught him as a young man. And he taught him cryptology. He taught him code breaking. Now, I'm a code breaker, and I'm looking for codes to prove the truth about William Shakespeare. John Dee was so famous that Christopher Marlowe wrote 2 books, The Alchemist, which was about him, and Dr. Faustus, which also was about John Dee. And I know that, and nobody's picked this up. And by the way, this is the first time I've given this talk, so I'm hoping I get the right speed, because I've got 45 minutes to get it all over. So I hope you feel privileged the first time in the UK in public that this is being revealed. But I knew that because he's pointing here, he's pointing to a symbol. I knew it was John Dee because this is the symbol. It's the monad. It was his symbol. So this is definitely John Dee that's been signalled out by Christopher Marlowe. John Dee also was heavily into theatre mechanics, and that's where Edward de Vere learned them. He even had a large dung beetle with a man on top of it fly across the stage, again about like Da Vinci, and that frightened the heck out of people. They really thought he was a wizard those days. They were quite scared of him. And he was Prospero in The Tempest by Shakespeare. Now, if we come to history, this was being revealed, what I'm telling you was being revealed, but not as definitive as I'm going to do it, by these 2 people. Delia Bacon, she thought Sir Francis Bacon was Shakespeare, but she sort of, if you like, lit the fuse to who was he really. And then this guy, unfortunate, named J. Thomas Looney, a school teacher from Newcastle, who said it was Edward de Vere. So 100 years ago, I'm not the first. I'm just at the end of a long line, and what I've got is the internet and all the power and intelligence of the internet that's helped me put things together. Walt Whitman, the famous American author, again, we're going back 100 odd years. A mystic cipher waits unfolded. Somewhere in Shakespeare, there's messages, there's codes. And Mark Twain, I'm sure you know Mark Twain of Huckleberry Finn, Is Shakespeare Dead? You can find that on the internet. He said there's no way the actor Shakespeare could have written this stuff. No way. Now, you know when you write things, as we do, and you write across and across, that's how we do it. But if you wanted to code something, you could write across and back again on a page. Or you could write down and down, like that on a page. Or you could write down and up in a snake-like manner. So there are 4 ways, if you wanted to code a message, you're not going to use the obvious one, you're going to use one of those 4 ways. And you could do it for any of the 4 corners. So that's 16 ways you can put a code down. And if you're looking at a grid, let's just say of 240 letters, put those in a grid, well, it could be 24 by 10, that grid, or it could be 12 by 20, couldn't it? So it depends on the dimensions of the grid and the letters in it, whether you're going to get a message or not. I know this is quite difficult to comprehend, but bear with me. So I started to see this. I started to see a guy saying, look, secret, Vere, in The Rape of Lucretia, which was one of Shakespeare's early writings, early poetry. He wrote that, and he wrote Venus and Adonis. So suddenly this guy's name's coming out. I started to look at 4 of the biggest things involved with Shakespeare. The sonnets that came out in 1609, and that's the front page of the sonnets, and that's the message to the only begetter of these ensuing sonnets, and so on and so forth. Now you look at that, and what's there? An awful lot is there. Because you've got 6 lines, 2 lines, and 4 lines. They fit Edward de Vere. They fit the name Edward de Vere. They thought TT was the name of the publisher. It isn't. TT has to appear somewhere on the grid to let you know this is the right grid. And how are you going to get the grid? There are 144 letters there. That could be 12 by 12. It could be all sorts of things. Well, you get it because you see that it begins with 2 and it ends with 4th. 2 and 4 is 8. So 8 is one of the lines of the grid. And you divide 144 by 8, and you get a grid of 8 by 18 or 18 by 8. Put the letters there on the grid, and what do you get? Well, the youth that was being written to in these sonnets is called Rosalie, and there you can see W-R, Reauthors Lee. That cannot be coincidence. That's a coded message in the sonnets. And then you see Vere, and then you see Vere again. So he's coded that the sonnets are to Henry Wriothesley, who was the 3rd Earl of Southampton, but it's not on the title page. It doesn't say who these sonnets are to. I looked at his grave. It's about 5 foot long, which sounds to me as though he's not in it. And at the back, that message, good friend, for Jesus' sake, forbear to dig the dust and close it here. Blessed be ye man who spares these stones, and cursed be they who move my bones. Doesn't fit into a grid, but guess what? If I do what it says and get rid of my bones, it does fit into a grid. His funerary monument at Stratford-on-Avon in Trinity Church, that's the whole thing, and there gives me the clue, because 16 and 16 are 32, and it's 322 letters, so I know it's 32 by 10, or 10 by 32. And if I fit all the letters in, I get a code. And if I take the Latin out, which is there and at the bottom, I've got 240 letters in there. Little ones are put in to give, if you like, red herrings. You ignore them. Again, there's a code within that. And the 4th one, the first folio of Shakespeare, there's 20 of these in the world. They're worth millions. They're all over the world. And to the reader from BJ has got to be Ben Jonson. And if he wrote this with a code in it, he's in the know. He knows what's going on. Now, from those 4 things, all of them, Vere, 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 when you put the grid together. They're just flagging out the clues. You've got to look at the original. This is Sonnet 76, and you can see in the original, I've marked in red where the spelling would be different to today. So if you spelt it in today, the grid wouldn't work, because sometimes there's more letters, sometimes there's less letters, so they're not going to align properly in the grid to give anything away. So you've got to go back to the originals. And then those days, a new code thing came across called the Cardano grill. And can you see in this, if you cut out, this is a metal plate, but you could do it with cardboard. If you cut out spaces and you get a letter and put these on the letter, you can see message, secret. Can you read that? So the cutout would give the message within the letter. So if I look at Sonnet 76, which you just saw, you will see within it, Vere, D, my name, De Vere. My name's De Vere. They're there in red. You might not be able to see them. I know it's quite difficult, but there's the coding. So Ian Fleming actually says in Goldfinger, once is happenstance, twice is coincidence, 3 times is enemy action. I have got De Vere's name 40 times, and I haven't even looked at half of Shakespeare. It's got to be right. If I look at a contemporary writing, Pallas Athene, a huge statue of Pallas Athene in the background there of the Acropolis in Athens. When the sun came up, glistening on that spear, it looked like it was shaking, a shaking spear, a Shakespeare. Now, the Roman equivalent to Pallas Athene was Minerva. So if you see a book about, let's put that on, Minerva Britannia, the Britannic Minerva, the Britannic Shakespeare, and the book has this on it, which I've enlarged here, shows you a hand coming out from a theatre curtain, writing another code. Sure enough, De Vere's within that code. And this book was written by Henry Peacham. It's got about 200 pages. Each one's got an illustration. I just looked at a few because this is hard work. I looked at Pallas Athene is caught in a net. Shakespeare is caught in a net. So let's have a look at these coded messages in a grid. Actors' masks, but includes the boar, mask of a boar, a blue boar if you like, and the boar itself. So I just looked at those 3. They've all got De Vere in them. They've all got the codes. Fulke Greville was a guy from the time who said, I know who Shakespeare was. I know the truth. He was killed. He was stabbed, assassinated, and his burial place is below this in Warwickshire. This thing itself has got voids in it. It's got 2 or 3 spaces. I'd love to take a hammer and chisel to this because there's something in it. There's something hidden in it about the truth of Shakespeare. Now, why do you not know about this? Well, because it is new, because I've used the power of the internet, and because I've only just found out about this myself the beginning of this year and started to add to it. So hopefully I'm teaching you something new. What happened to Edward de Vere and William Shakespeare? Because I told you yesterday they were both murdered. The link here is again Ben Jonson, another playwright, a guy who was highly jealous of the real Shakespeare, not particularly the actor Shakespeare. And again, behind this man, the Cecils, William and Robert Cecil, powerful men behind Elizabeth I and then James I. 50 years of power these people had. This is William and there's Robert. De Vere became, as a young lad, because his father died, a ward of court. And Cecil, in a way, thrust him into marrying his daughter, so Cecil would get into aristocracy. He gradually stole all the lands from the boy. He denuded him of his wealth. He was very angry, as was his son, when De Vere went off his first wife, the Cecil's daughter, because he thought he was cuckolded, because she became pregnant when he was abroad. They didn't like the theatre and its influence. They didn't like the fact that it could sway the general public certain ways. And they were aware that Shakespeare was mocking them. How was he mocking them? Well, Polonius in Hamlet, as I mentioned, was a reflection, a mirror image of William Cecil. And Robert, a mirror image of Richard III. Now, Polonius was stabbed from behind a curtain. In reality, Edward de Vere stabbed a spy for William Cecil, killed him when he was, de Vere was 17-year-old, but there was a servant behind the curtain listening to him. He killed him, stabbed him. Richard, one of the greatest kings, he rode the last cavalry charge. He was a brave man, in the Battle of Bosworth where he died. Now, recently, as you know, Richard III's skeleton has been unearthed, and he was not a hunchback. He had sclerosis, which is the same as Robert Cecil had. So when Shakespeare modelled Richard III on Robert Cecil, that's when they knew that he was mocking them. Unfortunately, because of Shakespeare's play, we all think of Richard as a hunchback, and he's portrayed as a hunchback, which is a great shame. So Hamlet reflected totally in the life of Edward de Vere. And so that made me think, let me look at Hamlet. Let me look at the very last bit of Hamlet. And here it is. As thou'rt a man, give me the cup. Let go, by heaven, I'll have it. This is a cup of poison. O God, Horatio, what a wounded name. Things standing thus unknown shall live behind me. If thou didst ever hold me in thy heart, absent thee from felicity a while, and in this harsh world draw thy breath in pain to tell my story. Well, I'm trying to tell his story now because he wanted it to come out. And if I use that Cardano grill, and again, I use that saying, that final bit of Hamlet, and put it into a grid, look what I get. The Vere name, unknown, shall live behind me. TTTT, that's the thing that you're in the right place. And Vere Ivar sounds like Vere Edward. This is the thing with the grill. You're not going to get it exact and tell my story. If I do the grid the other way, 16 by 14 instead of 14 by 16, I get me, de Vere, name shall live behind me, hear and tell my story. Now, it's never going to be exact because you have to have a message that people can ordinarily read, and you have to somehow fit a code within it. The code learning is difficult. Sometimes you're going to get the letter in the wrong place. The plain message has got to make sense. But the Cardano grill, as I said, Eward Weir Edward de Vere, gives it away. Now, he's supposed to be buried in St. Augustine's Church, Hackney, which became St. John's at Hackney. And don't forget, I'm saying this is one of the oldest aristocratic lines in the UK. No record of time and date of his death, no cause of death, no record of a funeral, no memorial. Burley, Cecil, took his papers away. He was basically blotted out from history. No obituary, no tomb, no records of where his grave is, no correspondence from his friends. You would think his friends would say, Edward's died. Nothing from all his friends. And the Earl of Southampton, Rosalie, he was arrested on the same day and imprisoned in the Tower for a while. He was the guy that was written about in the sonnets. So write about what you know. It was written then, just before James I ascended the throne. It was published in 1604 when James did ascend the throne. De Vere was dead that year, and it was published in the first folio, the collected works of Shakespeare then in 1623. So now we come to James. He came to the throne in 1603. Within months, Edward de Vere was missing, presumed dead. Remember I told you about those executions, including Mary Queen of Scots? Well, Thomas Trentham was the father-in-law of Edward de Vere. He led Mary to her death from Tixall, where she was staying, to Fotheringay Castle. And the execution, Edward de Vere was one of the people on the council that signed her death warrant. They killed James I's mum. You think he might be angry about that? You think he might look for revenge, served best cold? Got to remember, within months of him ascending the throne, Edward de Vere disappeared, as did others that were connected with the death of Mary. Here's Fotheringay Castle. Lovely, isn't it? Have you all been there? Anybody been there? Anybody heard of Fotheringay Castle? It was wiped. Oh, yeah, okay. Well, it was wiped out. That's it now. Just that mound that the main motte stood on. It was erased, like everything else connected with Mary, Queen of Scots, was erased. So Shakespeare's mask is crumbling now. And then literally this year, 2 months ago, Elias Ashmole, he was the president of the Royal Society that, spurned out the Royal Society of Chemistry, the Royal Society of Geography, Physics, the lot. Scientist, very learned man. And I just read that he had found one of the sonnets. He kept one of the sonnets with his papers. Why? Why a particular sonnet 116? So again, I put that into the code thing, and look what I got. You can see rosy lips, and you can see kiss. That's giving it away. This is the one you want, kiss the rosy lips. And again, if you can't read the red there, there's the blue boar is there on the heraldic shield, the star of the heraldic shield, Bulbeck. Remember I said he was Viscount Bulbeck? That's there. Oxenford. Oxenford was a way of writing Oxford, Oxenford. Shakespeare, I'll explain that. So the grid is 15 by 30 for those letters, those 450 letters, and that's what it gives away. Now the upstart crow, the Shakespeare, this is Robert Greene, who was another author. There is an upstart crow beautified with our feathers, that with his tiger's heart wrapped in a player's hide, definitely Shakespeare, because that in Shakespeare the line is tiger's heart wrapped in a woman's hide. So he's definitely pointing at Shakespeare. Supposes he is as well able to bombast out a blank verse as the best of you, and being an absolute Johannes factotum, jack of all trades, it is his own conceit, the only Shakespeare. There you go, Shakespeare, that's why it's in the grid. If I look at it the other way, turn the grid around, I get Vere, Ed, Tempest, Vere, Shake unknown, his alter ego, never writ, Vere. If I look at the monument, Henry Wallace, the painter, over 100 years ago, see Henry Wallace here, this is his painting. And in the painting, he's creating the bust of Shakespeare that's at the memorial. Here's Ben Jonson showing a death mask. There's another death mask up here somewhere saying, I want you to put the face like this. So he wants Shakespeare's face to be the one we all know and love. This is Trinity Church in the background where the monument is. And can you see this little statue here? These are clues here, because the little girl here is playing with a blue bottle, poison. And this statue, I'll just quickly show you, that's it. That one's in Kew Gardens. And it's Heracles or Hercules strangling the snake. The snake was the snake of verbiage, words, and writing. And when he strangled the snake, because it was a shapeshifter, shifter, it changed into the Horn of Plenty. The Horn of Plenty, of course, being everything Shakespeare's written for us. The intelligentsia, the hidden people, what they used to call the invisibles, this was their first book, very complex. You can see, but somebody's being pulled out of a well there. Somebody's being unearthed, brought to the light. Somebody else is being pushed off a cliff, looks perhaps with an actor with a mask. But what I want you to notice is up here in the sky, because we've got Heracles with the snake again, and the date, 1604, when Shakespeare, Edward de Vere, disappeared. So again, this witch's brew of Macbeth is falling apart as we look. And when I talk about murdered, Edward de Vere, when he was 17, killed him, when he was behind the curtain. That link, as I say, with Polonius. Christopher Marlowe, it seemed a favourite way, stabbing in the eye. Stabbed in the eye. He was a spy as well. Gabriel Spencer, stabbed in the eye by Ben Jonson, so he was a murderer. Fulke Greville, stabbed, the guy who knew about Shakespeare. And Shakespeare, the actor, well, died of mysterious illness after one night out drinking with Ben Jonson and Michael Drayton. Was he poisoned? There they are drinking. And the very next day, and it happened to be, and I wonder if this was on purpose, his birthday, St. George's Day, April the 23rd. The day he was born was the day he died. Was that planned? Was that a message to other people? So what did Ben get out of it? Well, he became the very first poet laureate. Not immediately, because that would be too suspect, wouldn't it? But after 1604, he became the very first poet laureate. And he got his own place in Westminster Abbey. Unfortunately, because he's very poor, he's buried vertically. There's like a 1 foot square in Westminster Abbey in Poets' Corner. He's buried standing up. So there's the timeline of the deception. Hamlet was published. Edward de Vere was murdered. The sonnets were then published in Shakespeare's name. John Dee died impoverished because the king didn't like him either. William Shakespeare, actor, was murdered, and then the first folio came out. Now, again, if you're interested in films, there's quite a good film. Derek Jacobi fronts it. It's called Anonymous. It actually paints Ben Jonson as a good guy, but it is clearly about Edward de Vere being the writer, Shakespeare, and that's worth getting still if you're interested in more. So this Declaration of Reasonable Doubt, Derek Jacobi signed it, Mark Rylance, I'm sure you've seen Wolf Hall. These are very key people in the Shakespeare story. And 5,000 others, including myself. Walt Whitman and Mark Twain would have signed it had it been there in their day. So again, think about it, and if you think there's even a germ of truth to this, sign the Declaration and get the movement going. All truth passes through 3 stages. First, it's ridiculed. Second, it's violently opposed. And third, it's accepted as self-evident.